Everyone, we're just going to be starting in a few minutes. So if we'll just wait for people to drop in, and then we'll be handing over to Dave Paterson and Emma Defew from MASTS, and having a listen about the future of MASTS.
And Mark James is online, but he's in the far reaches of Palau at the moment doing some fisheries work. So his internet isn't as stable as it might be, but hopefully he'll be able to join for questions and answers.
Yeah. And if anyone has any questions, can you chuck them in as we go into the Q&A section, and we will be getting to them at the end, and everyone hopefully will be around for that. Just wait another minute or so for everyone to drop in, and then we can start. I reckon that's all good. If you want to.
Okay, thanks very much, Liz. First of all, thanks everyone for attending and listening. What we want to do today is just bring you up to date with MASTS structure and function, and also our plans for the future. So I'm going to give a little bit of background because I think it kind of sets everything in context, and also just to show the sort of depth of history and the achievements we have managed to make as a kind of platform for what we intend to do in the future. So if you look back over MASTS, it has now quite a long history, created in 2009 as one of the last of the pooling initiatives funded by the Scottish Funding Council. And I suppose one of the first things to say about that is that when MASTS was first formed, it was relatively well funded, and it had money to attract people to Scotland to work in universities, and the partners were able to spend the SFC money to attract people to work in their laboratories. And also there was money to support graduate students. And so the first phase of MASTS was, relatively speaking, well funded, although we have to recognize also that the partner universities put a considerable amount of money into it. So the Marine Alliance for Science and Technology was born then, and the overall objective was creating excellence in marine science for the benefit of the people of Scotland. And I guess that hasn't changed, except that perhaps we're looking abroad. I guess Mark's presence in Palau is an example of that, and hoping to spread our capabilities further and also join with other groups to help push forward marine science globally. So that first phase of quite well funded project work lasted for 5 years. And when that came to an end, the situation changed in terms of the actual funding that was available. But I'll come back to that in a minute. So the original partnership was smaller than the partnership we have today. And it was learning about how to work with different groups and with each other. And it's interesting that the actual consortium agreement to support MASTS and its members took 2 years to sign, passing through all of the lawyers associated with each of the partners. So that consortium agreement was quite a significant document and set the tone of MASTS for the future, but also let us appreciate how seriously all of the partners were taking it in order to make sure that that document was correct. And when MASTS was first launched, we talked about joint research themes and promoted those within the structure of MASTS. And it's interesting to see the turnover of staff and who is here and who isn't. Bill Turrell was one of the early in people that was involved and still is. And people like Jared Wilson, who's now moved on to a different job but is still involved with MASTS. So the networks that we form seem to be lasting. And obviously the topics that we cover, some of them will continue into the future, such as fisheries, which will always be important to Scotland. But there is still the possibility for developing new areas and thinking about other types of structure, organisation, and communities. One of the other ambitions of the early MAST programme was this linkage with the wider world and with industry. And if I was looking critically at MASTs, I'd probably say that this is one of the areas that we do have a weakness, and that we don't link as well with industry as we possibly could do. And although we have tried to do this through production of material, offering cooperation with industry, we form relationships with partners that have lasted a long time, but it's difficult to bring new industries on board, although we fully intend to spend more effort on that in the future. And perhaps one of the reasons for that is that the Scottish Government also was putting money into different areas in different ways. So the pools were not recognised as particularly vectors for industrial cooperation, much more in terms of academic. Although some of the pools have strayed into the industrial side more strongly than MAST has. But about the same time as the second phase of MAST was launched, the innovation centres were set up. And these were really the organisations that should provide the strong linkages between academia and industry. And I think it's probably fair to say at the start of this, when the innovation centres were first set up, the communications between pools and innovation centres wasn't as good as it could be. But that has changed with time. And now we are working quite closely with some of the innovation centres, sharing PhD students and looking for opportunities to promote work together. And so that gives us some ambition for the future to extend those links and to create further partnerships with other industries that we haven't touched on yet. So when MAST was formed, we started out with a structure that included the broader, higher level ambitions, the research themes, which included most of the topics you can imagine about marine systems, the dynamics and properties, the productive seas, and also marine biodiversity function and services. And in some ways, that structure has served us well and is still sufficiently broad that we can work under those structures. I think one of the things that people sometimes don't realize is that although MAST is mainly marine, we are happy to operate on the boundaries of that system and talk about things like salt marshes, the effects of rivers, of fish that spend their time in freshwater and marine water. We don't set a boundary line that strictly partitions the marine from the freshwater environment. And I'd argue that neither we should, because obviously these systems are interlinked. And we have worked with the freshwater laboratories, and we will continue to do so. And maybe there will be some expansion of that kind of work in a more interdisciplinary and open manner. So the dynamics and properties of systems, I'm not going to go through all of the themes, but just to say that they have been influential. They've allowed us to think about how MAST is functioning overall, and also to support the finer granularity of the research through the research forums, which are housed underneath the themes. And the theme leaders have changed with time, but always there's been good engagement, and they help to represent their research forums at the sort of advisory board and governing council stage, which is important to keep that flow of information going. The other thing that happened as MAST matured is that we began to be used as representative in Scottish marine research on a wider area. And that allowed us to look at what the research forums were doing, where they could be linked with visitors from other areas. And you see Mark Hartle here, who's taking part in a visit from a delegation from India. And And MASTS became part of a programme that Scottish Government would often use, and you also see the Scottish Advisor for Marine Science, Colin Moffat, in this image as well. There are other examples of this. We also supported a Chinese delegation coming to visit, and we've been asked for a number of other delegations. Also, we've visited other countries as representatives of marine science in Scotland. But if you look at that second phase of funding and ask, what should really drive MASTS, then it's partly about those additional services, but it's also about the research and putting together teams and helping teams from among the MASTS community attract research funding that perhaps otherwise might be missed. And one way that we were able to do that was to supply funds to groups that were getting together to make submissions to larger programs like the European Union. And there was quite a successful run of programs. Just use an example here with the Atlas program developed by Murray Roberts and supported by MASTS and SAGES, I believe. And that developed into even further work. So if you put all of these programs together, then you can see that MASTS has actually helped to attract significant additional funding to Scotland. But this is one of the problems of assessing the success and failure of any organisation, is you have to ask the question, would some of these things have happened anyway? Well, the answer, truthfully, is we don't know, but that having put the money into those, the seed funding is incredibly important for getting people together, but also the networks that are established within the developing MASTS community. And I used an example here for, I use myself, since then I don't get into trouble with GDPR, but this is a sort of network of my early days. And then after the development of MASTS, you can begin to see a larger number of connections. Now, okay, you might say that my case is slightly different because as the director of MASTS, or the executive director, then part of my job is to go out and meet people and talk to them about MASTS, but nevertheless, it's impressive. And of course, you can do this analysis in other ways. And if you actually do it the other way and use the Marine Alliance of Science and Technology, you can't display it on a single screen because the computer won't handle it. So if you drop down the resolution, you can begin to show the depth of networks that MASTS has created. And as you can see, this is only showing 100 connections out of, in this particular analysis, over 8,000. It's actually quite fun looking at some of the titles that come up. Obviously some of them are what you would expect, but Music Planet and some of these other ones are BBC Landward, or perhaps less expected, but show the depth of connection that can be created and has been created within the MASTS organisation. One of the other innovative things that MASTS did was form a company so that it had legitimate legal status. I could actually tell you quite a long story about this. This was not popular necessarily with all organizations who thought that the creation of this company would be competition for them in some way, shape or form, and that it would be prejudicial to working across the marine sector in Scotland. We didn't believe that. And part of that was because we knew what we wanted from MASTS Scotland as a company. It was a means of engaging with organizations that it was difficult to work with without a legal status. And that includes things like the European Union, but also with other industry. And it also gave us a flexible means of providing work and handling funds. But it's a charitable body. It makes no profit. And any money made is returned to the community. And it's proved to be a very useful vehicle for MASTS to engage more broadly than simply as an academic structure. Interestingly, one of the people who was vehemently opposed to MASTS in the first instance came back after a couple of years and said that their fears had been misplaced, and that MASTS Scotland was working in a useful and supportive way. So it allows us to interact with industry. It allows us to be a bit more fleet of foot in taking part in things like European programs. And it allows us to produce things like reports that we can do on the basis of the MASTS community, rather than having to go through every single member. None of the other pools have yet copied this, although we've spoken to a number of them who are interested in doing so, and that's maybe something they will want to do in the future. So I guess that takes us to the kind of present day of what we're doing at the moment at the end of this phase 2 of Scottish Funding Council funding. And certainly I think if you look at the amount of work that's going on, it's fairly impressive. And there are a number of things that we do now that are entirely novel compared to even I think the ambition for MASTS when it was first born. And that's been an evolution, and it's been an evolution not only in the structure of MASTS, but also in the people taking part and their ambitions. So we still have these broad themes. They're run by different people now, and some have evolved greatly, some have merged, and there may be new themes emerging because the challenges are changing, and that should be recognized. And the themes and forums, the forums part of MASTS is a flexible working area which allows us to respond to whatever challenges. And we are still attracting funding, and a recent example is the Saltire Emerging Researcher Scheme, which we are successful in attracting from the Scottish Funding Council. And that again is distributed among our members to look for potential overseas cooperation that can be developed into the future. And again, I won't go through them in detail, but here's some examples from Strathclyde, Edinburgh, Napier, Glasgow, and St Andrews, ranging across a wide range of scientific developments. And these are small amounts of money, but they can lead to much greater cooperation later. And it's all about people and setting up trust between these groups. And this helps expand MASTS reach and also develop the trust that people have in MASTS. A larger exemplar of that is that recently MASTS also attracted the Sustainable Management of UK Marine Resources programme. This is a much larger programme which is supported by UKRI and took the I guess the organisational capability of MASTS to act as champions to develop this £12.5 million programme. So we're helping to organise this and helping at two levels, one of which is the actual programmes that have been funded by UKRI through SMMR. We have a sort of operational team that helps coordinate that work. But in addition, and looking more towards the MASTS framework, we're promoting a wider network of people working on sustainable management of marine resources, which is known as the SMR net, and that is open to everybody. And we are developing, again, that network of researchers. And this is very much based on impact and interdisciplinary work. And of course, we have used the MASTS networks extensively to promote and help support this. And if you're interested, there's a 3-day conference between the 9th and 11th of May, which will be held in person for some at the Mercury Hotel Bristol, but there's also online options. And that is all about driving transdisciplinary collaboration in understanding and managing marine resources. And of course, the challenge there is fundamental in terms not only of the human use of coastal resources, but also in changing climate and how those systems can be made or help to be more resilient, or at least to manage the changes that are going to occur. So, MASTS has gained trust, and it has created opportunity. And we certainly don't want that to stop. We expect that to continue in the future. One other very strong part of MASTS has been the skills part of it, the training initiative that started with phase 1 and has developed into phase 2. And I'm going to pass over to Emma Defew, but I'll continue with the slides. Emma.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, so back when MASTS started under phase 1, we set up the MASTS Graduate School, and as a result of that, we now have 76 alumni out there. A lot of them still engaged with MASTS, still involved with MASTS. You can see from the graph kind of some of the career destinations of those people. And then based on the success of the MASTS Graduate School, we were also able to attract funding from UKRI for the Super Doctoral Training Partnership as well. And we've just welcomed the 3rd cohort of students under that. And we're currently recruiting for cohort 4. So that's kind of 18 studentships across 7 of the MASTS partners. We're doing pretty well on our monitoring visits from UKRI for this graduate school. And we've also recently been awarded funding from NERC for some diversity, equity and inclusion funds. One of the schemes that we introduced under the MASTS Graduate School was working with the University of Strathclyde, and we've introduced what's called the Postgraduate Certificate in Research and Professional Development. And last year we had 7 of our first alumni from that as well. And all the super students undertake that. And that's a way of helping the PGRs articulate all the skills that they develop as part of their PhD that kind of go beyond the academic effectively, and will hopefully help them walk into the job that they want to at the end of their PhD. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have 2 touch points for the graduate school. We have an annual retreat, which normally happens in March. Before COVID, this was obviously in person, generally in the Avonmore area. And this is a 3-day event where we undertake various training, we introduce speakers, and we do activities like motorbiking or canoeing or whatever takes your fancy really. And then the second kind of touch point that we have is the annual science meeting, and I'll talk about that a little bit more now. The slide kind of, or the second half of the slide on the right there, these are kind of quotes from our alumni, and it's really kind of really great to see that they really valued being part of the MASTS Graduate School, and even today use those networks that they developed as part of that in their kind of work and social life effectively. Next slide. Okay, so in lockdown, there was lots of bad points. Lockdown, it actually gave us a really good opportunity to enhance our kind of communication side of things. So I'm sure you'll all know Hannah Jones. So she's been instrumental in getting our social media much more prevalent. For example, during COP, there was 14 days attendance, resulting in 366 tweets from MASTS during that. Hannah set up a LinkedIn site, we've got a YouTube site, and all of these things are helping increase our engagement, and particularly increasing our engagement wider than just Scotland. Next slide, please. Also during lockdown, then Hannah started the webinar series, and this is the 3rd year it's been running. We attract people from all around the world at these. Obviously we couldn't have Michael Kaiser's Day, but if any of you are interested in the ones that are happening April through to July, you can see some of the speakers there. Again, this has been a really good way of both showcasing the research that MASTS partners do, also allowing MASTS partners to network during lockdown with the wider scientific community. Next slide. So Hannah is also our kind of online event ninja effectively. She's pretty hot on our event platform Hopin, which allows us to continue delivering things like conferences and networking events, both for ourselves Also, Hannah's skills are known far and wide now, and she's often approached to run events for other people. So that might include things such as running the Blue Carbon Beyond the Inventory event that happened last year in November. We've helped SAGES, we've helped structures in the marine environment. It helps Scottish Government run workshops. So again, it's all ways of keeping that network connected. Okay, our website, last year we had an update of the website as well to kind of bring that up to something a bit more modern. And even in 2022, you can see we've had over 3,000 users to the site. I mean, it's generally in the United Kingdom, but we do have viewers and users of the site from all over the world. And actually one of the most popular pages is the vacancy web page. So if ever you need to advertise a vacancy, please just drop us an email and let us know. Next slide. Hannah's also involved in other things. Hopefully you're all signed up to the MASTS emails. You'll get an email every Friday which highlights important news, important events, recent papers, jobs, all that kind of thing, which is really helpful for people, I think. Hannah's also been involved in exhibitions. She's been pulling together DIY libraries, producing some brochures, and hopefully you will all have seen the recent kind of video that was on Twitter, and is also a longer version available on our YouTube site, highlighting some of the great work of MASTS members for International Day of Women and Girls in STEM. Next slide, please. We also have another initiative which was developed a few years ago called People, Ocean, Planet. This has been principally led by Chris Leakey and Hannah Ladd-Jones, and that's looking at behavioural change and ocean literacy. So they've been involved in various kind of artist collaborations, an exhibition at the museum in St Andrews, and kind of wider literacy initiatives. Next slide, please. And then finally, we have our MASTS annual science meeting. So in lockdown, we took it online for the first time. So we've had that online for 2 years now. And last year, we attracted our greatest number with nearly 600 people attending that. So, you know, it really is a fantastic way of getting MASTS research work out there in the wider domain. This year, we're looking at how best to run the event. Obviously, there's pros and cons of running a hybrid or in-person versus an online event, but there will be a MASTS annual science meeting in November, and more details will be coming out about that soon. Thank you. Okay,
thanks very much, Anna. So I think it's clear that MASTS has contributed significantly to the structure and function of marine research in Scotland. And the question, I guess, is, you know, what now and how should it go forward? The background to that is a number of reviews that have been published by the Scottish Funding Council, particularly the Heathwaite Review, which was an interesting document which suggested that pools had done quite well, but there was a new way of thinking about things which should mean a new generation of pools emerging with significant funding to meet the challenges that are emerging in society. So that was quite an interesting document. And there was quite a space of time between that document was received and the sort of response of the Scottish Funding Council. So in that time, the pools were not idle. They looked at the document, they looked at what they were doing, and they looked at ways of improving functionality. And one of those mechanisms was the formation of Research Innovation Scotland, which is an organisation which particularly promotes pools working together, because one of the assertions in the review was that there should be more work between the pools and between pools and innovation centres. And so the pools with some of the innovation centres set up Research Innovation Scotland to meet that challenge, and also put in some support to workshops and status reports on various aspects of research across the pool's infrastructure. And that's available on the Research Innovation Scotland website. So I think the really important point to take from that is that the pools looked at these reviews and responded to them as well as they could in order to increase the promotional work that we did. In addition to that, we looked at MASTS about the strength of representation that MASTS provides, and we began to think about where else we could do more in terms of interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary work, and also fulfilling a Scottish Government ambition of being more visible abroad. So MASTS has been representative on the European Marine Biological Resource Centre, the European Marine Board, and has formed specific linkages with organisations of a similar nature in other countries, such as the Oceans Frontier Institute in Canada. So we feel that we are responding very positively to these reviews. And also we're quite influential, I think, in the NOC Association Board, helping to make sure that the work that is done in Scotland is recognised on at a UK level. And also where plans are coming through, that they're appropriate in terms of a Scottish context, which can be quite different from other geographical regions. So MASTS is at the end of phase 2 and going into phase 3. What do we mean by that? Well, we wish to support the research that we already do. We expect some of these research forums to change because of the natural progression of work. And there may be an opportunity soon to have some of those progressions funded, and I'll come to that in a minute. What we also wanted to continue to do is to maintain and develop the networks that we've already formed. And Emma's point about the graduate school is a very good one. Members of our graduate school are now running units in Marine Scotland. They're now independent researchers. They're now entrepreneurs. They are all willing to support MASTS and come back to give their perspective and advice to the next generation of people that we train in the skills that are needed for the future shock that we're going to be experiencing. And so MASTS is needed in order to help promote that. So the Scottish Funding Council continue to recognise the importance of pools. However, they are going to cease the funding of the pools, which means that the direct support for pools will stop in January 2023. However, the SFC will be starting some new competitive schemes of funding called challenge-led funding, called ARCs, which we'll be developing shortly. And this is very much hot off the press. We had a meeting with the SFC this morning for them to begin to outline their plans, and their first documentation of this is now on their website. So there are two good news messages from this. One is that the Scottish Funding Council have recognised the importance of the pools and wish them to continue, despite the fact they won't be directly funding them. The second is that within MASTS itself, our governing council seems to recognise the benefits that MASTS provides to the community and is supportive of MASTS continuing. So this is dependent on our partners still being willing to contribute at the same level as they've always contributed. We're not looking for more money. We are looking to continue MASTS in the way that it has been run, but we can replace Scottish Funding Council money with money that we attract through MASTS Scotland and through other initiatives such as the SMMR and super programs, which provide some economy of scale. And if we look at the funding, it is quite, the MASTS budgets at the moment are in good shape, and we expect to be able to continue, even if we didn't attract many more large programs. However, since we have been successful in the past, we don't expect that to change particularly into the future. So what are the SFC actually offering? They're offering what they call ARCs, these alliances for research challenges. And when you read the documentation, that it's quite like a pool in a sense. They're looking to provide money to support groups to form and be successful in attracting further funding from larger grant awards such as the GCRF, the European Union, and perhaps UKRI. So in a sense, it's a mechanism for bringing more money into Scotland. The process will be two-stage. First of all, groups will be able to put forward suggestions for these areas of research. Those expressions of interest have to be in by the 6th of June. They will be then assessed by a panel. And then there will be a notification of successful applicants. We're told this will be non-competitive at that stage. So basically, if your expression of interest is accepted, then you probably will be funded. But I should say that the funding is not huge. We're talking about £150,000 a year for 4 years. So funnily enough, in the same kind of ballpark figure as individual pools received, or a bit more. So this is an opportunity that MASTS will almost certainly take advantage of to help create proposals for research into the future. But the MASTS organisation as such is not dependent on the success or failure of these bids. However, we do think we're in an extremely strong position to be able to respond. And one of the other things they've said about the ARC funding is that it should be very much targeted on Scottish Government policy. So there are a lot of documents that have been coming out through Scottish Government. Many of them suggest the importance of marine science and of the resilience of marine systems. MASTS is in an extremely good position to think about all of these different documents and to put together some strong proposals which would link some of those ambitions into a new challenge-led funding package. So I'm going to stop there and take any questions, but the fundamentally important part of that is that MASTS is in a good condition to continue. I should also say we just have a new member, which is Robert Gordon University, which has just joined MASTS. And they will help to expand our networks even further and also bring some strengths to MASTS that we perhaps are slightly weaker in some of the technological areas. And so we're delighted to be able to say that. And we're also very confident that MASTS will exist into the future and that we will still be there to support marine science across the board. Okay, thank you. And I'll open the floor to any questions. Mark, I hope you can maybe hear me. I don't know how your connection is at the moment.
I can hear you, Dave.
Thank you.
That was great, Dave. We've got one question. So the question is MASTS planning to apply for that funding? And is it one of more applications under MASTS Scotland?
That's a good question. We asked the same question this morning, and there's no definitive answer. I think that MASTS will certainly be making one, but I suspect more than one bid, because I can't see that we could make one bid that would encompass everything that MASTS does that's important to Scottish Government. But the Scottish Funding Council are reasonably, you could either say unclear or flexible, could be either, in terms of the granularity of those bids, and there was some discussion of that. So for instance, you could imagine a bid which would be blue carbon. You could imagine a bid that might be the green economy, upcycling, or you could imagine a bid that might be improvement of fisheries regulation and catches. We have to think about that, think about what MASTS can do well and what is the greatest benefit to the community. But it's certainly true that we are not limited to a single bid.
Great. There's still time if anyone wants to put any more questions in the chat for anyone. Oh, another one's popped up. Do you have any plans to connect to other UK groups? And if so, how are you prioritising this?
Thanks, Matt. Well, it's a two-way process, I guess. It's we've actually tried to engage with other organisations down south, including Newcastle and Bangor, and it depends a little bit on the freedom that we will have in phase 3, where we have no SFC connection, will actually allow us to form relationships with other organisations, so that you could see MASTS becoming a wider organisation, more UK based. So I'd be delighted to discuss that with you, Matt. And certainly we do wish to, spread the importance of marine science, as the MBA does, with organisations like NOC, Marine Management Organisation, DEFRA, and we work hard to do that. So we'd love to support you in that too.
You seem to have a question, Dave, from Anna Race that's popped up. There's a hand up somewhere I've just noticed.
I can't see that, Mark. So if somebody wants to talk, can you unmute and just talk on this, Liz?
It says, hi, Anna, your hand is raised. Are you able to put a question in Q&A?
I can allow you to talk if you want to ask a question. Just give us if I allow you to talk, just give us a thumbs up and go for it. So there.
I can see Anna there, but can't hear anything yet. Isn't technology marvelous?
If you if you're able to ask a question, then just drop me a message and we can ask that again, or you can put it in the chat. Cool. Does anybody else have any burning questions that need answering?
I don't know how many of the audience were expecting to see Mike Kaiser. So.
Cool. Well, I'll ask one question. It's really interesting to hear about the evolution of MASTS and how it's gone. I suppose how have you managed to make sure at each stage you're going down the most successful route? It seems to have evolved really far. It's just be interesting to hear kind of the backstory behind.
I think it's driven by people's interests. And also where we have funds to distribute, for instance, in the peer program, where we could put money forward for teams to get together and support that. And it's remarkable how little money can help, just hiring rooms, making some lunch available for people to get together with a specific target. And that doesn't necessarily happen without a larger organization initiating it, because you don't get groups from St Andrews wandering over to Dundee, or from Strathclyde wandering up into Napier, unless somebody organizes it and says this is a good thing to do. And you also pick up experience that you didn't perhaps know was there. And so a lot of it is bottom up. And then of course you get the top down efforts like we have from the SFC now for this challenge-led funding. But we will be in a good position to apply for that. So it's neither one nor the other. But we are weaker in certain areas than others. And again, that's to do with capacity and where you want to prioritize. We always prioritize research. We should do more on the technological side, and we should do more with industry, but we do have limited resources. And I think we've always felt it's better to do some things well than everything badly. But perhaps we will be able to create opportunities in the next phase of MASTS to do a bit more with the innovation centres.
Great. Well, if that is all from anyone listening and there's no more questions, then I think we'll end it there, which was really good to hear the updates on MASTS and everything. And if anyone's interested, the MASTS webinar runs on the last Wednesday of every month, and the next webinar series is on the 27th of April with Max Holloway from SAMS and UHI. So
thanks, Liz. And if anyone does want to ask any further questions, just email us at MASTS.
Fantastic. I hope everyone has a great rest of the day. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Take care. Bye-bye.